Stop me if you've heard this story before. A spaceship crash lands in a farm in Kansas. The couple who owns the farm find what seems to be a baby boy in the wreckage. Having tried but never succeeded in having a kid before, the couple sees the child as a miracle and decide to raise them themselves. The child grows up and begins to display incredible superpowers, and with those powers he decides to become a merciless killing machine. Oh. In a year of highly anticipated movies, Brightburn was perhaps my most anticipated. Being a huge fan of comic books and the horror genre, it felt like a movie that was perfectly made for me. So, does it live up to the hype? I'm happy to report that it does. First off, a little context from the world of comic books. Both Marvel and DC have a long history of alternate reality retellings of their own stories. In Marvel, these are often called what-if stories. For instance, what if Spider-Man never became a crime fighter? DC has a similar concept, a banner of books called Elseworlds. That is, stories that take place on alternate worlds to the main DC universe. A famous example is Superman Red Sun, which essentially asks the question, what if the spaceship had crash-landed in the USSR instead of the United States of America? The movie Brightburn essentially asks the question, what if Clark Kent grew up to be a really, really evil kid? Now, this isn't an official Superman movie, but it's such a deliberate analogue that the parallels are right there to be explored. The most effective way this movie explores this question is through some truly horrific examples of superpowered violence. There are 4 or 5 incredibly gory scenes that spell out just how much damage a superpowered figure like this could do to mere mortals like you or I. There's a scene where the character is just flying back and forth through this house like some sort of possessed cannonball. It's truly horrifying. In particular, this movie tries to take powers like super speed or flight, ones you would think are pretty innocent, and turn them into something pretty creepy. The child, Brandon, who's played by the very off-putting Jackson A. Dunn, is almost like a ghost at some points with how quickly he moves from spot to spot, appearing at will. The director, David Yarovsky, chooses not to show Brandon soaring heroically through the air, a la Christopher Reeves, but instead has him just hovering a couple of feet or inches off the ground. He gives off this incredible otherworldly vibe, showing just how off-putting this kid really is. Another wonderful aspect is the creative ways in which they use heat vision, which I'm not going to spoil for you here. This is something else that has a background in Superman comics. In Brian Azzarello's Lex Luthor Man of Steel limited series, at one point he shows Lex Luthor looking out the window to Superman. The Superman portrayed here has these glowing red eyes, again highlighting his alien nature. This sort of image is used throughout the film several times. Another example of Superman's powers being used to terrify is in Action Comics number 775, in a story titled What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way. In this comic, Superman is coaxed into fighting a new generation of bloodthirsty heroes, and he demonstrates just how brutal his powers could be if he wanted them to be. The message we get from these comics is, thank God Superman is a good guy. The message we get from Brightburn, however, is the exact opposite. Now, Brightburn is probably going to draw a lot of comparisons to the movie Chronicle, another excellent film. The biggest difference between the two is that Chronicle was more interested in examining the found footage aspect of horror movies through superhero tropes. Brightburn, however, has more in common thematically with demonic possession movies, and its action scenes are a lot closer to a monster flick. The humanity of Brandon while he's going berserk is completely lost, and he's portrayed as an animalistic force of nature who can't be stopped or reasoned with. There are some great scenes of doomed characters hiding from Brandon that are reminiscent of the Aliens franchise. In terms of the possession narrative, Brandon seems to come under the influence of the spaceship he landed in around his 12th birthday, awakening his powers in some sort of a puberty metaphor. The movie then has some fun parts where the parents are trying to deal with a difficult preteen who also happens to be a superpowered, burgeoning monster. Here we get the archetypal horror story about parents being terrified of their child while still trying to save them, if indeed that's even possible. This part of the movie echoes works like The Omen, Silent Hill, or Village of the Damned. In Brightburn and these other films, part of the horror comes from the fact that we know this kid isn't evil because of their poor upbringing. It's due to something else. It's nature not nurture. This is especially true in Brightburn, where the parents seem to have been pretty good to the kid. Taking us back to the world of Superman, these parents function as analogues for Martha and Jonathan Kent. Like the Kents, the parents in Brightburn are pretty wonderful. Elizabeth Banks is fantastic as a caring mother who'll do anything for her child, and bearded icon David Denman plays a grounded, realistic dad who just wants to do his best, despite being a bit out of his league. They have great chemistry together, which is good because a lot of the movie rests on them. Likewise, Matt Jones, who played Badger in Breaking Bad, is in this movie as the kid's uncle, and he's fantastic. He's both really funny and really good. Jordan Peele has spoken a lot about the link and the similarities between horror and comedy, how both require a form of tension and a form of grounding if they're going to have any payoff. And Jones's performance really underlined that for me. He hits all the beats really well and provides a much needed valve during a couple of scenes. I really can't say enough about how well Brightburn uses Superman tropes for horror. These tropes have been traditionally presented to try and inspire awe, and a lot of that is done through the music. For instance, instead of uplifting John Williams-inspired strings, we're given this deep, distorted, bass-heavy horror sounds. This sort of music does a great job of taking these scenes that would be cool or interesting and making them inherently troubling instead. Similarly, the costume design on Brandon is fantastic. There's been a lot made in the history of Superman about why he doesn't wear a mask. A great example of this comes from Mark Waid's Superman Birthright. Superman understands that as a super strong alien, he can't hide behind a mask or it will scare people. Brightburn takes this lesson, internalizes it, then gives us the creepiest mask they could find. Not being able to see this kid's face, again, goes to dehumanize and further alienate him. Throughout the movie, Brandon's powers cause electricity to flicker off and on, and this is used to a really cool effect. During my favourite scene, the lights are flickering a little slower than normal. For instance, there'll be 2 seconds of light, half a second of darkness, and then a couple of seconds of light again. Each time the camera goes black, the movie takes us to a different shot of what's going on. So it'll be shot A, darkness, shot B, darkness, shot C, darkness. Probably for about 6 or 7 shots. What this does is perfectly mimic the panel-to-panel movement of a comic book, with the darkness functioning as the borders, and each scene taking place as a different panel. It's a piece of really creative filmmaking by David Yarevsky, sort of reminiscent of the strobe-lit scene in the first Kick-Ass movie. The biggest question I had going into this movie was just how genre-savvy is it going to be? For those of you who don't know, genre savviness refers to how much the characters of a piece of art understand the genre they're in, and then how they respond to the tropes of that genre. For instance, the characters in The Walking Dead never refer to the undead as zombies in the TV adaptation. This implies that there aren't zombie movies in the world of The Walking Dead, and it means that characters are free to act as if they've never seen a zombie movie. An example on the exact other end of the spectrum is the film Zombieland. In this movie, characters constantly refer to them as zombies, and Jesse Eisenberg's character gives a detailed breakdown of the rules to survive the zombie apocalypse. These rules play into the tropes of the genre wonderfully, showing how a guy like him has been able to survive the whole time. So, I was interested in how Brightburn would handle genre. Are the parents of this kid aware of the existence of Superman comics and movies? If so, would they compare themselves to this? Would they, in effect, outright say, it's like our kid's Superman, but evil? No. No is the answer. Which is probably for the best. It seems like the characters in this film aren't aware of the existence of superheroes. There are no clever winks or nods to the camera during this movie. Brightburn engages with tropes, but it takes them very seriously and horrifically. This helps to make the tone of the film deadly serious. Again, when comparing this to Chronicle, it's a very different movie. Chronicle was all about a few kids finding out they had superpowers, acting in their own self-interests, then finally becoming good or evil. Brightburn, however, doesn't have Brandon go through any sort of moral questioning. Once his powers are awoken, he straight up sees himself as the Ubermensch. And this might be the element that stops the movie from being great as opposed to just being really good. We're just not given much of a picture of who this kid is before he breaks bad. There's this vague aura of him being possessed or awoken by the spaceship, but we're never really told if he's trying to fight or resist it, outside of this one line of dialogue that I didn't really buy. It appears it's just in the nature of this kid to be evil. There's actually a classroom scene pretty early on in the movie that sort of explains what's going to happen in the movie. One of those nature metaphors that perfectly encapsulates the story, which is just something I hate. But that's essentially what this movie is trying to say. It's in his nature to be a killer. Essentially, if you go into this movie looking for a great moral struggle about what Brandon's going to do with his great responsibility, you will be disappointed. Because at the end of the day, this is a horror story about a Superman analog, not a superhero story with horror overtones. And that's a pretty important difference. With all that in mind, my final verdict is that I really enjoyed this movie. It takes a lot of different elements from the Superman canon and runs them through some horror filters very effectively. The lead performances are all very strong, there are some legitimately frightening moments, and the movie runs at a tightly plotted 90 minutes. If you're someone who enjoys a good horror movie, and particularly if you are or ever have been a Superman fan, I highly recommend this movie. So, have you seen Brightburn yet? Did you enjoy it? And did you enjoy this review? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. This is the first time I've done a review of a movie that's still in cinemas, and it was a really fun experience, so let me know if you'd like more of these. Go ahead and hit subscribe, I've got a couple of long-form video essays coming down the pipeline soon. I'd like to give a quick thanks to my friend Kate for helping me edit this script, and a quick shout out to my two newest patrons, Kitty Germain and Inga Leonora. Thank you both so much for helping support the show, it really means the world to me. If you would also like to support the show, check out the links in the About section, and I'm on Twitter at HardcoreLime. Thanks for watching.